Welcome to another episode of the Semi-Related Podcast, and we have a couple of, records for us here. This is only our second podcast to feature two guests, but it is the first time to have a returning company. So we have the NMFTA joining us today, and I'll let the speakers introduce themselves. But I'll start with you, Joe. Joe, do you want to tell us a quick bit about your title and role with NMFTA, and then we'll go to you, Artie?
Yeah, I thank you, first of all, for having us. I'm Joe Orr, the Chief Operating Officer at NMFTA.
And then Artie, we'll go to you.
All right. Well, thanks, Jacob, for having us. I'm Artie Crawford. I'm the Director of Cybersecurity for NMFTA.
Awesome. Well, it's great to have you both, and I mean, we were having some good conversation before we even hit the record button. So I'm excited to see what comes out of this. But um, I think as a starting point, I'd love to learn a little bit about both of you and how you got into your roles with the NMFTA. So maybe I'll flip and have you start, Artie, and then we'll go back to Joe.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it, Jacob. So my tenure's only been about 9 months here at NMFTA. I'm a long time in and out of the government type of guy, right? After spending some time in the Marine Corps and then bouncing around the federal system integrators, some time at Microsoft, and then on to CISA after that, right? Um, Found myself speaking at a conference. Joe liked what I had to say, and then I found myself working for Joe about I don't know, about 9 months ago.
And for me, I spent 25 years in telematics in the fleet industry, doing IT operations, and always loved the industry. As a combination of IT technology and again the industry, and I found myself really loving what I did, and had an opportunity in an interview with NMFTA, and really believed in the mission. The mission with cyber was, hey, this is a give back. This is a give back to the industry to really educate on cybersecurity. Also, really liked how they service the membership, the LTL industry, and some of the changes we're about to make with classification, and really believed in the mission of NMFTA. So right away was wanted to make the move. So it was for me, it was a great opportunity to jump into the NMFTA and take on the role of the COO.
Yeah, that's a great point. We had Keith Peterson on a few weeks ago, so he was who I was alluding to. We've had the NMFTA appear on the podcast before, but I would love to hear kind of you all's perspective on the NMFTA, the mission that you're kind of talking about here, Joe, and then how cybersecurity plays into that as well.
Yeah, so we've got a couple missions at NMFTA. So number one, we're a standard setting organization within the industry as far as classification. So as you talked to with Keith, we're making classification changes, and that's really based on our what the membership wants, and that represents carriers, brokers, shippers, to simplify classification. And I know you talked to Keith about that. We also develop software to support classification, and that's Class IT Plus. We started beta yesterday, so I'm excited about that. We've got the membership part of it, and that's another beta that we started with our AMS, and that's to support the again the LTL industry. We do SCAC, so retail and cross border. They need to have SCAC when they cross the border. Border Patrol checks for that, so we give out the SCAC codes. We do digital LTL, so things like bill of lading, freight visibility. We also are getting into truckload. So we're partnering with several carriers to create the standards, not only for LTL, but also for truckload. And then as we started to work with these digital standards, we realized, there's a big need for cybersecurity. So one of our give backs was cybersecurity. So a couple of years ago, NMFTA started. Well, it's more than a couple of years ago, quite a while ago. They started cybersecurity, and with the effort of really helping to educate the carrier community and supply chain in general on, hey, how do you educate more and become more aware of cybersecurity? And so, what does that mean? It means asset, non asset. So, we make pretty significant investments in asset side research. If you look at a truck and a trailer, there's so many different connection points. And so, we research those connection points. What are the vulnerabilities? We work with the OEMs, we work with standard setting committees, we do research projects. And we try to fix these and we try to educate. And then on the non-asset side, we create some guidebooks and some other things that Artie will talk about, guidebooks, core controls. But our goal is really to help educate. And whether you're an owner operator or you're the biggest carrier in the world, doesn't matter. Our goal is to really help you understand cybersecurity and make it part of your culture and make you aware of what's out there. Artie?
Hey, thanks, Joe. So, as Joe was alluding to in the cybersecurity, side of the house, right? He was alluding to the research that we do. We're on the asset side, where we're breaking down sensors, we're seeing if they're vulnerable, making sure that those sensors, have right communications paths, that the communications paths back and forth to the ECU on the tractor unit, don't have either don't have vulnerabilities or don't have way that they can be hacked, so to say, right? I know that that's an interesting term and sometimes has some very bad uses, but it's basically just being able to break that sensor from making it tell what it's supposed to tell when it's supposed to tell it, right? Producing a result. And if you can alter that, then we're doing that research to make sure that communications path can't be altered, right? But I think, and that covers the asset side of the house that Joe's talking about, working with different research partners, expanding our research, knowledge group, our knowledge base, and then those research partners where we can expand and use some of the things that we've done as jump points to research that may have, significant value to the rest of the industry. And ultimately back to the OEMs and kind of letting them know that they're doing business right, or that they have some vulnerability they need to kind of, I don't want to say fix, but they have some vulnerabilities in their software systems or how they're doing business that they may need to work on their security somewhat, right? So never in an alarmist fashion, but in a fashion of education. But I think where Joe was hoping I would go, and I kind of stayed in the asset side there for a second, right, was getting into the things that we're doing more on the enterprise side for the trucking industry, right? So on the enterprise side, we kind of got together, myself and a guy named Ben Wilkins, who's one of the principal engineers over here at NMFTA, and just what a great guy to work with. Him and I have teamed up together. My knowledge coming from one industry, his knowledge coming from this industry, and then our combined knowledge in cybersecurity. We were able to get together within the first week of being there and go, okay, what do we think is missing in the overall industry, right? We already know that the communication in the overall industry is broken when it comes to cybersecurity. Mums is the word, right? But we got to looking at the industry and we saw that the industry kind of had a gap in how they implemented controls. And what I mean by that is there are several different standard organizations out there like ISO, CIS, NIST, all of these controls, TAPA, security controls, whatever they are, right? All of them have hundreds and hundreds of controls. And when you open up the book and before you make the first check mark, you're like, oh my gosh, how am I going to eat this elephant, right? And not only is it one elephant, it's a herd of elephants. and you're not going to be able to eat it at one sitting. And by the way, you don't even have anybody on staff for the most part that know what the words mean inside the controls.
Mhm.
So, so what we elected to do, right, is we elected to take that big set of controls coming out from one of those certifying agencies or standard agencies in the cybersecurity world, take it and put it in regular IT terms, right? That's digestible, that's understandable, but it's also actionable. So we broke fleets down into 4 different sizes, right? We broke them down into the owner operator, the small fleet, mid-sized fleet, and then the large fleet size. And we based our assumptions after talking to several carriers or owner operators. We based our assumptions on their operations because not all operations are the same. And which set of controls do you need to have, you know, just to be successful and be slightly more secure than all of your peers?
Mhm.
And we put out this guidance in these forms of guidebooks that says, okay, if you're an owner operator, do these 12 things and you'll be able to run faster than the other guy, right? You don't have to be faster than the bear. You just have to be faster than another guy, which really went over well. The organizations that have a lot of owner operators within them looked at this and went, oh my gosh, how do we get this out to our members? And then we started, then we did a small fleet, we did a mid-sized fleet, and those controls are more encompassing, right? Taking a viewpoint of, hey, let's implement these controls, let's make them valid, but let's do them as low cost as possible to make you more secure. So out of the list of controls, we put 40 of them in the small fleet guidebook. They say things from like do multi-factor authentication, segment your network, make sure you have good quality backups, right? So all of these type of, minimalistic controls that don't cost you a lot of money to do.
Mhm.
And then we took it and maybe added 10, 15, 20 more controls in the mid-sized fleet because their operations happen to be a little bit more complex, you know. And when you start to look at it, right, because who's doing the IT in each one of those things, right? So as that owner operator, you're the guy that drives the truck, pays the bills, writes the invoices, and trying to secure it.
Mhm.
Then you're that small fleet. You may have one IT guy on site. He may be a part-time IT guy that's Jenny's nephew that's going to the community college that's learning IT. So he's pretty good, but he doesn't know cybersecurity. So we kind of and then when you get to that mid-sized fleet, you may have one guy that, knows cybersecurity. You may have an IT team. So we took these things into consideration when we built these type of guidebooks. And it's really went over well because, now the associations are looking at us and saying, okay, what are you going to do next? And it's funny that you say that because now we're looking at, hey, let's give you some checklists, so that when you go back to your vendors, the questions that you ask your vendors. How do I combat cyber-enabled freight fraud? So those type of things are things that are forthcoming.
Yeah. And I think that sets us up nicely too for kind of where you see this going, right? So you all have this challenging piece, right? You kind of hinted at it in there too, but I want to dig a little bit deeper on this of how do we bring all these people together to have these conversations to even understand where the industry is. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience of, working with, like you mentioned, these OEMs, the carriers, the brokers, the shippers, whoever it may be, and even beginning to like have these conversations of where are we seeing some gaps, or where is there opportunity to have better collaboration?
Yeah, so we do a conference once a year, and it's the only trucking cybersecurity conference. So last year we took a real different approach than we had previous years, and we made it really specific. It's the only trucking one, but we had carriers and we had OEM speaking, and we had a lot of fireside chats, and that was really good. We've also started quarterly roundtables with industry experts. And we also do a lot of presentations. Whether it's we're at National Private Truck Council, we went to the Freight Fraud Symposium, but I think it's just getting out there, and it's having these conversations, and it's doing things like this. But it's just getting people to open up and having the discussions and bringing the awareness. I think, again, we were talking earlier, there's always been, it's almost been like, oh, I've been impacted, I'm embarrassed. Anybody can be impacted. So there's really nothing to be embarrassed about. The industry has always shared their experiences, but with cyber, it's like they shut down, they stop communicating. And so we made a call for action. It was about a year ago at Manifest, and said, "Come, let's talk about this. This can't be a topic that we ignore." And we've had some people come to us, and so I think it's just about creating that forum to have these discussions, and then educating. And that's really what we want to do. We may not have all the answers, but we want to create an environment where the communication happens so that we can help create these answers. Because in this industry, a lot of people use the same technology. And there's a lot of uniqueness, like with the NCAP technology, but there's also a lot of similarities. I mean, the TMSs that they use, a lot of them have not yet converted to the cloud, but they're getting ready to convert to the cloud. So there's just a lot of journeys that they're on that are similar. Artie?
Joe, I think you hit it right on the mark, right? Getting the people together and getting them to communicate is paramount in this industry, right? Last year we found out at the cybersecurity conference, and we had these two carriers, on stage, and we had them talk about their experiences, and they talked about them so openly, even though both of them really attacked the same problem from very radically different standpoints, right? And by doing so, it was able to give those lessons learned, those good, bads, and uglies that went out there, right? For instance, one of the people on stage said, "Okay, we had a great cybersecurity plan, and it was the document was 95 pages long, and then we got hit. We read the first 2 pages and threw the rest of the damn thing out." Well, right? Because they realized that they hadn't prepared for what they had come in for, and they had over processed what they actually needed to do. And then the other carrier that was there, made a very blunt statement. And it's like, we turned it over to our insurance company, and our insurance company guided us every step of the way of what to do and what not to do. And this was a very open and generalized conversation about two very specific events that could have went wrong. So but they ended up with good outcomes. And don't get me wrong, both companies lost money but didn't pay the ransom, right? They lost through operating and everything else, but that actually increased their reputation in the shipping world, right? In the carrier world, because of the fact that they were so open, they communicated with their customers, they had a call plan, and whether it was a shipper or a broker or a partnered carrier that they would work with, they were able to communicate everything that was going on, and they were able to stay, up and running, maybe at a lesser level for a short period of time, but they really did a great job of making sure that they communicated what was going on in the event. And this was all set up, shameless plug for the NMFTA cybersecurity conference, right? They were able to have, sidebar conversations and network all through that. So it really was a good news story across the board for everybody, coming out of it.
Yeah, I've met with Erin, and she's great to work with, and seems really enthusiastic and like a great planner for those events. But going back to what you said there about that having that 95-page document, right? I think it was Mike Tyson that said everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, right?
I've used that.
So how is that punch changing? I think we're in a radically different world than 5 years, even a year ago, right? So how have you seen that change happening? And then two, um, the preparation to avoid the punch happening in the first place, right? Because that's always the best plan is to avoid it in the first place, right? So
So that's a great question, and Joe, I'm gonna go ahead and take this one real quick because I think it delves into two categories. First of all, it's not avoiding the punch; it's when the punch happens.
yeah.
It's gonna happen, right? So as Mike said, have a plan, have a backup plan, right? And then even have a backup to the backup plan, but know you're going to get punched in the face,
Hmm.
right? So, um, but taking that just a step further, right? It's changed immensely in several different ways. First of all, ransomware versus ransomware as a service. And we just did a podcast or a webinar on this last month, right? And the interesting part about that is ransomware versus ransomware as a service is kind of a big deal. When we talk about ransomware, we talk about a company or an organization that has done something or stands for something or is geopolitically in a different viewpoint than the attacker, right? So, and I'll give a short description, right? I had a client or a customer that was a NBA basketball team out of Memphis. I won't say the names, right, of what that team was, but they had a player that posted on Instagram how he felt about the Second Amendment, right? Uh, that team ended up a victim of a ransomware DDoS attack or ransomware as a ransomware kind of DDoS attack based on the fact that um, they just didn't believe in the viewpoints that the team should be posting on their Instagram and everything else that went along with it. So that was very politically and very motivated from ideology, right? Ransomware as a service, on the other hand, is something that affects every size of carrier, every size of organization, because of the fact that it's so shotgun approached that once they get into the system, they're looking for what you'll actually pay for, whether it's some exponent of your profit and loss, maybe some reputational piece that maybe you're a leased carrier for a large retailer and they want you to pay because of the fact that they'll release some information and you won't be that leased carrier any longer for a large retailer. The amount of data that they're looking to extort from you, right, or hold ransom for you is what. If you look at Ford back in the 70s when the Pinto was blowing up, right? So if you look at that and go, okay, it's not their P&L. I don't want to get $10 million out of Ford because I can get $100 million out of Ford because I found the email that said, let's just roll the dice and take our chances with the Pinto. We're not going to do a recall. Well, that was worth way more money than getting $10 million out of a ransom. So it's changed immensely because of the fact that the target is now broader, but I don't have to make as much money each time, right? I can just do it more and more often. So that's the first change that is just all over the place. The second change is the use of agentic AI or large language models to enhance the speed and sophistication of the bad actor. We're slightly behind on the defensive side of being able to stay up to date. We're leapfrogging them from time to time, but generative AI and large language models have made it much easier for the threat actors to gen up a business email compromise or to gen up a phishing campaign that really hits the mark. Hey, your boss is giving you a $25 Starbucks card. That's believable. Me getting a $200 gift card from Microsoft might not be believable. But Debbie sending me a $25 Starbucks card, our executive director, that's a pretty believable event. Hey, click on here to receive your card, right? So the campaigns are becoming more sophisticated, more believable, and they're not even if they're not English as a primary language, right? The large language models are helping them craft these emails in such a fashion that, that would be. So those are the two big problems that we've seen transformation on the threat landscape and with the bad actors.
And then too, I guess kind of the second piece of that I want to dig into a little bit too is we've talked some about, making that plan, making a plan for the plan, all of that preparation, but you've talked about all these different levels or sizes of carriers, right? You kind of broke it down into those 3 or 4 stages. What is something that you see a lot of, do you see people confusing IT and cybersecurity? Do they, even know where to begin, or what is kind of the challenge there on the understanding of how important cybersecurity is?
I'll take the first stab, and then Artie, I'll take a different approach, and then I'll let you answer the question also. So, I think the biggest thing within this industry is where does cyber start and end?
Yeah.
So, and that's one of the things I brought up in the beginning was the asset and the non-asset. So, and it was probably 6 or 7 years ago when I did telematics that I first really got asked questions about cybersecurity within the telematics industry. Like, okay, what version of Windows is tethered at the time? Is the device running? How often do you patch? Things like that. Most of the telematics now is bring your own device. They have tablets. How many of those are on MDMs? How many of those are owned by the drivers? How many of them are controlled by IT? And so I think it's the demarcation of what is controlled by IT or cyber that the drivers have. And then is cyber aware of all the connection points in the truck? And that also expands to the maintenance shops. I don't know how many maintenance shops I've gone into that they're running Windows 2000 or even Windows 98 because it's like, oh, I've got this old software that I got to hook up to the data bus and I can't update. Well, then they go and they plug it into the network because they got to get new firmware for the ECM. So I think it's really important that you also look from an organizational perspective, not just the difference between IT and cyber, but also what do you control the assets? Does cyber have visibility into everything that connects to the network? And that includes the trucks and the maintenance. And then I think your question is really interesting about the IT and cyber, because I know even at NMFTA, Artie and I have this discussion, so I'll let him respond to that part of it.
Well, cyber is everywhere, just so we know. Sorry. I think that, it's a very interesting way that you pose the question, right? Because where you sit is how you see things. So we have the day-to-day business of keeping the business running, right? Keeping the lights on, so to say, right? And cyber needs to be able to support that day-to-day running of the business. And I think for the longest time, people were scared to get involved with the cyber people because, oh my God, they're going to tell us no, we can't do that. We're not allowed to have these type of computers. We're not allowed to have these type of handhelds because they're not safe, or these scanners don't work right on our network. And so they would refuse to ask the cyber guy and just beg for forgiveness, right? But now as the maturation of the cyber engineers and the cyber community is taking place, right? We're seeing that maturation take place where more of the senior leaders in the industry and that have been around, a little long in the tooth or a little gray in the beard like myself, right? We take more of a business approach to it and say, okay, look, let me help you make the business secure. Let's make sure that the business is secure. We don't want to take away from the business. We want to make sure that the business is secure, right? So it takes some involvement and it takes some finesse. Sometimes we have it, sometimes we don't, as Joe alluded to, right? Because sometimes the cyber guys in general might be conflicted with the IT guys in general.
Mm-hmm.
So most of the cyber guys come from a pretty rich IT background, right? Which helps them be able to speak the right language, but they're still in the premise of, oh my God, we've got to secure this because it's broken. But it's not the cyber guy that gets to take on that risk, right? It's the business owner that gets to take on that risk. And I think that as you start to engage and start to work through these processes with, senior level folks and everything, and they start to understand that the risk is theirs, that the IT team or the cyber team or the people who have a little bit of knowledge in cyber or whatever, those are the ones that are having to articulate that risk. And you can only hope that they're articulating that risk in the best fashion, right? And then when it comes to laying out projects, it's laying out projects that have the highest rate of return, right? So low cost, high rate of return. And we'll look at a project like rolling out MFA, right? Multi-factor authentication, which is something that we don't see across the industry. I would say if I had to count it out loud and had to make a guess, and this truly only a guess, I would say probably less than 35% of the organizations use some form of multi-factor authentication, whether it's an authenticator app or whether it's an RSA, dongle that has a number on it, or you receive an SMS text message, right? Very few organizations, I'd say less than 30% or less than 35%, are using MFA, which actually is one of the highest returns on investment because it's a click of a switch inside of a server that says, hey, look, let's make this person prove two things that they know. And we're still seeing a lot of organizations that have multiple people use the same HR account, right? Or the same accounting account or accounts receivable account so that everybody can get in there and look at all of the emails. It's an efficient way to do business 20 years ago. It's a very dangerous way to do business in 2025 because now only one account needs to be compromised to have access to everything, because typically that one account has admin rights and then they can kind of move and do the things that they want to do. So it's really an education process across the industry, right? From things like multi-factor authentication, role-based access control, network segmentation, those type of technical attributes that don't cost a lot of money, but can have high value of return when it comes to securing the network or the organization.
Mm-hmm. And two, I think kind of expanding on what you said there about how important education is. I mean, I can speak from experience a little bit here, right? Every few months, whenever you have to reset your password for different things, and then you have to try to remember different passwords across all these different systems that are always rotating, and then you have to do the text message. That can seem frustrating in the moment, but you need to remember kind of what you're preventing too. So are you all seeing more interest from operations or different roles within the business? And two, what are some things IT and cybersecurity teams can do to better kind of educate their teams about the risk that is encouraging them to set up these systems?
So to answer your first question, absolutely, we're seeing more interest. I was just at NPTC, and it was one of the best conferences I've spoke at. Ben Wilkins and I were there, and I was a little bit worried because there wasn't a lot of IT people signed up for it. So I thought, how's this one going to go? It was a packed house, and the questions were some of the best questions I've gotten, and none of them were IT, because they thought of things from an operational perspective. They thought of things like, hey, my truck, in my warehouse, it was just outstanding. How do I secure this? What about my dispatcher? Just really good. And so I think people really are starting to think of this from an operational perspective. Always a little bit disappointed when I see some of the surveys that are out there that within the industry, cyber's not still making some of the top 10 lists. But I think at this conference, it did make the top list, and the question showed it. And so I like the fact that operationally people are starting to think about cyber. And I think that the steps that they take are starting to look at, okay, what are the questions I have to ask? And some of the advice that we gave is look at your vendors. Are they the right vendors? What questions do you ask the vendor? It's got to be part of your RFP process. Vendors are your partners. I know we dropped a couple vendors over the last year. We added a couple vendors. We look at our vendors so carefully because we know that sometimes your weakest link is your vendor. And if you are, that's one of the things we learned at the cyber conference. When you're in this situation, you really want somebody that's going to be with you if you are impacted by a cyber event. And you want to know, how do they test? How often do they test? What's the results of their tests? Like a penetration testing. And you want to know if it's 2 a.m, you can pick up the phone and call them. So operations, yeah, definitely starting to hear more from them. Other groups like legal is starting to get more involved, looking at the contracts. How do I have to communicate? But also, like I said, really reaching out and understanding the vendors. And then, Artie, there's a lot of things in the core controls that you've touched base on.
So I think Joe's is spot on, right? We're starting to see more things operationally that make sense, right? And truly, cyber is this convergence of, what happens in the IT world, what happens in the operational control world, and then what happens in the physical world when we start looking at cameras and door locks and, things of that nature, right, into a facility. There's this convergence of how can it be manipulated. And so we're starting to have a whole lot of people ask questions about, okay, am I doing the right thing in this area? Am I doing the right thing in this area? And I think by looking at some of the things that we've developed, right, basic sets of controls, core controls, those type of things. How do I fight or combat cyber-enabled cargo theft? Right, by looking at some of these controls are not unique to one guidebook, right? It's very interesting that some of the controls inside of the cyber-enabled cargo theft, they're the exact same controls that are in the Midsize Fleet Guidebook, but they're packaged in a way that makes sense, right? That operationally makes sense. Hey, how do I stop social engineering, or how do I reduce social engineering of a broker? How do I reduce social engineering of a shipper, right? Oh, here's the core controls that go with that, right? Here's the 5 or 6. Those are the same controls that are listed somewhere else in one of the other manuals, right? In one of the other guides. So we're not math and rocket science here, right? We're repackaging these sets of controls in ways that are digestible so that different aspects of the organization can understand, right? And then you were asking, the other question that you asked is how do we see changes being made across organizations? And I will tell you that the biggest change that we see being made is training based on an individual job title or job set, right? So that the cyber focused training for a driver is focused on these package of events, and the cyber focused training for an executive is in these package of events. And then the cyber focused training for HR and accounting and, accounts receivable and dispatch, they fall into this bucket. The training is tailored to the job role so that it becomes relevant and not a click-through event, right? That typically takes place in most type of cyber trainings, right? You receive an email that says that I have an uncle in Nigeria trying to get money. Do you go ahead and click on the link? That's so old and generic. It's not applicable. But if I send the accounting person an email, that says, hey, look, due to some changes internally, we needed to change our banking information. Here's our new routing number and account number. Please click here to enter your credentials, or please change our routing numbers, and then the list of questions is, oh, do you pick up and call the vendor? Do you go ahead and change the account number? So all of a sudden, these things become more relevant to their day-to-day jobs. And these type of cyber trainings are actually hitting the mark. And we're seeing an increase in cyber proficiency. Not that the organizations are doing a better job of implementing controls, but we are seeing a higher level of proficiency take place with the organizations, and the people that are in the organizations are being, the culture is changing inside the organization.
Yeah, and I think we've kind of touched on this, but I want to click into it again just because I know this is going to be such a hot topic and kind of give you all a bigger forum to speak to this directly. AI in cybersecurity. Before this call, I was reading you all's cybersecurity trends report, and one of the things that stuck out to me was the stat about some CIOs and CISOs deprioritizing Gen AI. What are some places you're seeing AI's AI having a role in cybersecurity? I'll leave it pretty broad. I know there's a few different directions you all can take it there. So
I'll take the tactical and then let Joe take the strategic part of this one, right? So tactically, we see both good and bad, right? Tactically, we see where generative AI and large language models are helping the bad actors write more scripted stuff, be better at, facilitating social engineering, right? For the most part, whether that's through deep fakes, whether that's through fake phone calls, phishing, text phishing, smishing, right? Or those type of events. We're seeing that generative AI and large language models are doing a really good job of supporting the bad guy, right? Mm-hmm. But we also see generative AI doing a really good job of recognizing patterns that are different than normal patterns, whether that's network flow patterns, whether that's access patterns internal to an organization, much like a DLP solution would use, right? Taking DLP just a step further, why is accounting looking at HR docs? Why is HR looking at maintenance docs? Those are pretty straightforward DLP solutions. Mm-hmm. But understanding why things are happening on the network that don't normally take place. So that's the kind of the good and the bad of generative AI. Then the ugly part of AI is trying to stay one step ahead of the bad threat actors. But it's also increased the threat landscape, right? And I think that's the ugly part is that the threat landscape has become flatter. So that makes protecting it harder, right? And so that part of it is just kind of a little bit nebulous at this point, because the threat landscape is getting so large because of generative AI. And it's able to poke holes and find those holes faster than what it could. I used to have to do it as a human. I'd have to scan your network, see what version of what you're running, and then I could set up my bad guy entrance based on the vulnerabilities that I know. Now I can have Gen AI just do all that for me, mm-hmm. right? Oh, as a matter of fact, even launch the attack to start with. So I think that's the ugly part, when it starts coming to that is the flattening of the threat landscape. And I'll let Joe talk about it strategically at that point.
Yeah, I think, Artie hit it. It's really AI allows the bad guys, the threat actors, to be able to do things in mass quantity. So they're able to hit people that didn't think they were vulnerable before. And, mm-hmm. and that's what we're hearing is that, hey, I'm not the big names. I'm not susceptible. But with AI, they can literally spray out hundreds of thousands of email at once, and they look good. They look like they were written. And so you're going to have to protect against that. And you're going to have to implement software that looks at that. And so I was just telling Artie before this that I got an email that, and I know AI did it. AI scanned our site, found my name, my title, our executive director, sent an email. Hey, here's the updated NMFTA handbook. Take a look at the changes. Give me your feedback or something like that. And I looked at it on my phone and I'm like, this looks real. And it looked like it came from HR. And I couldn't hit more details because of the way it was on my phone. And I texted HR. I'm like, hey, did you do that? Did you send me this? And she's like, no, I'm at church. I didn't do this. So I called IT. I'm like, hey, why didn't this get blocked? Our software should have detected it and blocked it. It should have found the trend. And it got blocked to the executive director, but not to me. And I want to know who else sent it. And so our AI wasn't perfect. It didn't block it. And then, it was trying to get me to scan something to let the bad actor in. And then I've also had instances where AI has scanned our LinkedIn and saw that we welcomed the new employee that worked for me and sent him an email that I wanted some gift cards as a welcome. And I happened to be having lunch with him. He's like, did you send me this? And then, we at our conference, we had an example where AI, they did as a test, took clips of their CEO's videos, created a video saying they were getting rid of PTO. And it looked so real. It generated hundreds of emails and phone calls and response. It was all AI generated, and the AI software they used was less than $1,000. Now, that's the bad part of AI. For us, there's good parts of AI. You can use AI to detect, like Artie said, anomalies and differences. We're seeing AI that is being used to detect, information coming from the trucks. And are there anomalies coming from the trucks? AI is being used to detect all that. So, as Artie said, there's good things about AI, there's bad things about AI. And I think with any technology, if it's used the right way, it's great. But it can also be used in a bad way. But the one thing about AI is it opens up the opportunity for bad things to happen to the smaller segments within the industry.
Mm-hmm. And two, I think we've talked a lot about the digital world, but I see a lot of news about some of the examples, which I think you all have hosted of. It was like $300 worth of equipment, how they were able to get into a truck as well. Could you speak a little bit too about some of the implications on the physical world as well, not just digital?
You want me to take that, Jared?
Yeah, go ahead. You start.
Okay. This is Jacob. When you start getting into this becomes in that kind of that weird place, right? That is it possible? Yes, but is it in the wild? No.
Yeah.
Right. So when if you look at it from a movie standpoint, right? And I'm going to go back to a couple movies. Die Hard 2, right? When they adjust the altimeter, nothing more than, it's an IoT sensor that's in a plane that they adjust the altimeter and the pilot thinks that he's, 200 feet above where he's actually at and they crash the plane. Okay, got it, right?
Yeah.
And then you got all of the Fast and Furious movies, right? Where they derate a truck and they stop a truck and they tell the truck that it's still moving and everything else. And that's great that they're in the movies. And is that day coming? Probably. Are those things possible? They've been done in research, absolutely 100%. What we haven't seen yet, and this is the good news part of this story, right? What we haven't seen yet is these type of attacks taking place in the wild, right? And that's a good news story because they're very complicated, they're very sophisticated, and they take a lot of resources. What we are finding is most bad actors are lazy, right?
Yeah.
We're not building a Fast and Furious crew to, with 6 vehicles, 4 motorcycles, and a whole bunch of machine guns that they're not supposed to have, to hijack one load of sneakers, right? It's just not happening. But what we are seeing is we're starting to see more and more a delve into understanding the telematics. What are the vulnerabilities within the telematics? And how do we work with the vendors and the OEMs to make sure that these vulnerabilities are corrected or at least at minimum understood?
And
Is that a
Joe,
good setup for you, Joe?
Go ahead, Jake.
I was going to add a piece for Joe too, since he mentioned he was at the Freight Fraud Symposium here in Dallas. I was curious kind of how some of this ties into what you saw there and about freight fraud as well and cargo theft.
Yeah, and I think it does tie right in, and we shifted, not shifted focus, but we're really focused the last couple months on. There's several aspects of freight fraud, and one of the aspects that's not as much focused on is the cyber enabled freight fraud. And so at the Freight Fraud Symposium, Ben Wilkins spoke a lot about freight fraud and some of the studies and research that we're doing. And one of the biggest things is when it happens, it's just like cyber theft. It's like, is it getting reported? And in a lot of cases, it's not. And how are the bad actors getting the information? And really one of the big takeaways is that there's not enough being done to prevent it. It's too easy to do, and there's too many people not vetting. You got to vet who you're doing business with. You got to research. You got to research the MC numbers, the DOT numbers. You got to, who are you doing business with? And a lot of that just comes into best practices. And so that's one of the things we're very focused on is documenting some of those best practices. I think a lot of times people are dependent on, FMCSA is going to fix this problem, or so-and-so is going to fix this problem. Whether that's not is or isn't going to happen, I don't know. But I think we all, everybody's got to take responsibility and try to put in best practices to try to prevent it. It's a much big problem. And I walked away, Ben and I sat there and, just amazed at the size of the problem. I mean, it's big, but when it's very underreported, and it's such a big problem. And so you really, you want to fix it. And there's so many different ways to fix it, but it's multifaceted. And the problem is that, there's no connection points. And so, you've got people that, number one, it's under prosecuted. And number two, a lot of times connections aren't made. And it's getting as complex as any cyber criminal. A lot of times it's being done, and say, for example, in Russia, it may be physically executed by local gangs, but it's being orchestrated in Russia, for example. So you're not talking about the cops and robbers and the old school, pilfering. You're talking about very sophisticated cargo theft. And I think it's underestimated this level of sophistication this cargo theft is going through. And I think I underestimated it. I went to the team because, I wanted to do it. And then, somebody really tracked me down and was like, NMFTA's got to get involved in this. And they were pretty convincing. And, I talked to the team and we're all over it. And Artie and Ben have been all over it. And as they started to look into it more and more, they got more excited. And they did this brain map thing of it, and it's like unbelievably complicated about who you call and how you get passed off, and It's such a complicated problem, and the symposium showed that. But there's even more complications to it is behind the scenes, and I think that
Mhm.
that's a lot of what Artie and Ben have been working on.
Jacob, to take his point, right, with the complexity, it's funny. I've had several conversations, and one of our funny stories, I guess, so to say, right, is the right way to say that,
Yeah.
is we talk about at Bike Week how somebody stole $210,000 worth of bacon, which was actually 2 pallets, right, out of a small refrigeration truck at Bike Week in Daytona, right? So I'm having this conversation with, one of our government friends, so to say, and he's like, it doesn't even hit the mark. I said, so what do you mean? If I'd have started the conversation with $10,000 worth of fentanyl or $10,000 worth of 9mm rounds were stolen versus $210,000 worth of bacon, you would have taken me more seriously. He's like, absolutely, 100%.
Yeah.
I'm like, whoa, hold on here. $500,000 worth of this versus $10,000 worth of this, and that's more important. And it started to shape the problem for us of the complexities, right? That, hey, is 16 people out of one gang considered one crime, or is that 16 different crimes, right? That all stole two pair of sneakers, or they stole $500,000 worth of sneakers off of a truck. So all of a sudden, this thing became very big, very complex. Um, and that's why we started trying to put all this together so that we could better understand the complexities, what prosecutors needed to have as a mark in order to, reach the level of either federal prosecution or state prosecution or jurisdictional prosecution, whatever it was. The
Mhm.
crimes aren't sexy enough, right? Because we're not putting MS-13 in jail. We're not putting, you know, some bad, mafia group or cartel in jail, right? We're taking some people off the street that stole bacon.
Yeah.
So so that understand just that aspect of it, but that's the end result. And where Joe was headed with this was the setup to the end result, right? So the setup being is that we're seeing it start from somewhere in a Eastern Bloc or a stand country, right? All of the cyber events are taking place, and then either moving it to a bad guy e-retail site, right? And they're just making full profit. And that's most of the time what's happening is they're moving it to these e-commerce bad guy sites. And then the carrier that actually committed the crime was unwitting in the entire event because he picked up the load, he dropped off the load, and got paid for the load. He's already on to his next load,
Yeah.
you know. And then all of a sudden he's getting contacted about where did an entire truckload of Red Bull go? Where did an entire truckload of Nike sneakers go? And he's like, wait a minute, I dropped it off right where I was told to drop it off. And he became an unwitting accomplice, to this cyber enabled cargo theft, which is just huge, as Joe alluded to.
Yep. And
So,
two, I mean, that I think is a great example of the interconnected connectedness of it all too. The legal piece starts to come into it there as well. But as we're winding down too, I mean, already like you said at the beginning of the call, talking about, whenever you look at this, it feels like an elephant, or as you described it, a herd of elephants. I know you mentioned some of those guidebooks are a great starting point, but what is some of the first steps? Because I know you all have a lot of great resources. Where do you think someone should go who, hears about these issues to get started and say, okay, this is how I can get onto a roadmap or get onto the right path to better plan and better protect themselves?
so Jacob, I think that that's a great question, and right, and I'm going to be very self-promoting because I think the things that we're doing in the industry is changing the industry, right? So
Mhm.
go out to nmfta.org/cyber, right? Go out there, start to look at our resources. If those start to come back with questions, feel free to reach out to. There's an at cyber at nmfta.org email address. Reach out to that email address, ask your questions, join our webinars. They're free, right? We do a webinar every month on some topic that's relevant to the cyber world, right? June is actually going to be the topic of cyber-enabled freight fraud. We're going to be discussing all of the complexities. We typically have special guests on that are even more of an expert in the industry than we are. And we're actually being sought out pretty often now as, as pretty reliable experts in the industry, right? But we're always willing to learn from people that are doing this even deeper and better than we are as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then come to the conference, meet your peers, have the stories, have the discussions, right? The conference goes in October. It's October 26th through the 28th in Austin, Texas. Like Joe said earlier, it's the only cybersecurity conference in the trucking industry. And these are just great places to start, interact with, network, tell the story, understand the story. And if you're an up and coming IT guy that wants to understand the cybersecurity side of the house even better, right? Then ask us the questions. There's no judgment in this industry, right? Because, and as Joe hears me say, 1,000 times over, cyber's a team sport. And we've got to collectively do it together. We've got to collectively support the business, because without cyber, we don't have a business, and without the business, we don't have cyber. So they have to work together. And then collectively across the transportation industry, we have to be able to share what's went right, what's went wrong, and where can we make improvements collectively across the board. I would like to, give a shout out to some of the organizations that are recognizing the significance in cyber, and they're establishing positions within their organization for cybersecurity professionals, whether they're calling it information assurance, whether they're calling it cyber assurance, or whether they're calling it mission assurance, whatever they're calling it, it all boils down to the same thing: is taking that next level of maturation in the cyber domain to understand that this truly supports your business, right? And I think that's great for the organizations that have, I don't want to say stepped up, that's not the right way to put it, but have matured to understand that cyber does support the business.
Great. Well, I appreciate you all taking the time. I know there's a million different directions we could take this, and we continue to go on, but like Artie said, I would highly recommend everyone who's interested in learning more, check out the NMFTA. They've got a ton of great resources, and always have more coming out. So, well, guys, I want to thank you both for the time, and yeah. If there's any kind of final thoughts there, I know Artie, you kind of plugged where to find more information, but any final thoughts on best way to reach out to you all?
I'll turn the last segment over to Joe on that one.
Just feel free to reach out to us. You can find us on LinkedIn also, both Artie and myself, and the Cyber Conference also has a LinkedIn page. So always feel free to message us or follow us. You'll see everything that we're doing, and feel free to ask any questions. We are here to help and educate.
Well, I think you all are doing a great job of that. Sounds like you're all making great progress. So I want to thank you again for your time, and thank everyone for tuning in and listening to the episode.
Thanks, Jacob.
Thanks, Jacob.